Thank you very much for that, Sam. And again, it's just fantastic at having people from so many different sectors here, because I think there are lessons that can be learnt right the way across the sectors as we go. And I think certainly Vic Urban has been very generous in sharing some of those, certainly within the state of Victoria. Our next speaker is Paul Pettigrew, and Paul is the Managing Director of Mach Technology, a next generation technology solutions and consulting company. He's going to speak on the South East Queensland Water Grid ICT strategy program. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you very much. Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to the committee. My talk this afternoon is on the South East Queensland Water Grid, where at the moment I'm leading the ICT strategy over the next 10 years for that. Some of you may be aware of the South East Queensland Water Grid and the initiatives that were done. Broadly speaking, a decade ago there was major drought, the dams were empty, and this was affecting 1 in 7 Australians across quite a large area. One of the long-standing 40-year experienced water engineers I first spoke to said, I was sort of getting my hand around the scale of this, how many pits and pipes have we got, what sort of distance? And he sort of said it's enough to go around the globe twice. So we have a significant amount of pit and pipe and valves all the way through the water and the wastewater systems in this particular area alone. The reform broadly went through a few steps. The first of all was to cut consumption, and that's where there was a large amount of visibility in the press of getting water usage down. Very visible. Pensioners can't water their gardens, you can't wash your house, don't hose the path. So the community awareness became very high, and from there it was really starting to think, well, one dam was full but the other was empty and how do you actually provide water security? So that's where the concept of the water grid came in, and broadly speaking be able to move water around that region and mix it with different sources such as desalination. And there was a $9 billion investment into that particular area there. Another one, in the area these businesses were largely vertically integrated and run by the local governments within their boundaries. So right from that governance structure and financing right the way down through to the end of the solution delivery, it was a vertically integrated business. The reform we now have is there are 4 state government-owned entities largely looking at the dams, desalination plants, major trunks, and local government entities which are looking after then on the further distribution and then the retail relationship with all of the customers. So where we had vertically integrated businesses in a number of entities, we now have an integrated supply chain. So that was really the institutional reform, and now thanks to last week the dams are pretty well full. And I heard the Minister speak earlier this week and the word efficiency popped in there a couple of times, so we know what's coming next. What I thought I'd just quickly give you a little bit of insight on is the way we're actually approaching this, because one of the lessons I've taken from the other discussions today is think about the smart infrastructure first, embed it up front. It's a lot easier, quicker and smarter, and you'll get a surer result. And a few years ago when this whole drought was very much a crisis, I think it's fair to say that smart infrastructure wasn't given the same sort of airplay and consideration as it was to a dam about to run empty and a town like Toowoomba running out of water. Okay? So we're now living with the legacy of that thinking. The way we're approaching it is very much from an integrated supply chain and value chain. We're applying an enterprise architecture-based approach so that we actually have some well understood disciplines and methodologies and can produce some deliverables that business and technology people can work with. From that, there's a number of considerations with customers as well, and then I'll also cover a little bit on the operational versus strategic decision systems. This would be hard enough inside one entity, and there's a representative here from Ergon and Energex I know quite well. They have a shared services entity called Spark, and it's hard enough for them with just 2. We actually have 2 levels of government, regulators, and multiple entities to work with. So our project is very much in the centre here, which is very much the glue to actually bring all of these entities together so that we can actually focus on the information transfer and the data standards around that. This diagram here really just sort of highlights the difference between the physical supply chain and what we refer to the value chain. I think these are very important distinctions. From the physical perspective, it's quite easy for everyone to understand. It's a water pipe, it's a dam, it's going through a pump station, it turns up, goes through my water meter and it comes out my tap and the wastewater goes back out in the other direction. It's pretty easy to understand the physical side of that. Other sides is the actual information that then needs to flow between each of these entities, and then when broader discussions such as critical infrastructure security and policy and is the grid operating efficiently, it's a lot more subjective. And so that's really where the knowledge systems and the data actually come through to actually enable the efficient management of the grid as a whole system, and also those extra value-added services to come through for each of the community members and the customers. And then again is the interaction with other entities such as electricity and other activities as well. When we think about it in the customer context, when I grew up we actually had a couple of different types of pipe coming in when I was in the bush. We had a bit of black PVC that came from a dam, and sometimes it was a bit smelly and sometimes it was good, and right the way through to the rainwater tank. What we actually have now here, typically in urban, is a number of different water sources coming through. Everyone's intimately familiar with the potable water supply or your drinking water. Also your sewage going back out as your wastewater. Recently people have been talking about grey water. Okay, so it's coming out of the washing machine. Where do I put that now? And what impact does that then have on the environment? We also then have treated water, purified recycled water. We may not be ready as a community to drink it, but is there other uses for it, particularly in business, not just so much residential? And we actually have a number of different water sources going through the house. We also have local collection systems and people putting their own rain tanks in. So just with water alone in a residential house, it's quite a complex picture. If we then start to overlay that with the other utility services, so your classic telecommunications, the electricity, gas, drinking water was but one of the ones on the slide before, recycled water was but another one. Bringing all of this then together in a picture that the consumer can actually make the right sort of information or decisions around, then can change their habits. That's where we actually start to get the loop closing with the community, and then from there different opportunities will present. There is the demand management side of things. There's also the participating in community type information that currently doesn't exist, and the best analogies for that would be is the way in which social networking in current web areas is actually starting to take form. So imagine school kids participating in this as well. The top side of this is the really important piece as well, which is your metadata management and getting that information exposed not just to the front end and the consumer, but also to the back end systems. We're also talking across a very complex supply chain. So it's one of the diagrams from our pack, but it really illustrates some of the knowledge and decision systems across the top. And then you actually have the control systems, SCADA and control systems within each of these businesses. And there's a delicate relationship to balance there as well. So where we're heading with this, and this is my last slide, is how do we actually have a diverse set of utility providers able to come together and achieve value out of this new supply chain from a reformed water industry, and what's in it for them. Because it's just simply a regulatory compliance stick and say, give me this information, is not going to cut it alone. So what we're looking at here is things such as better situational awareness around incident management and emergency response, whole of grid performance, looking at the grid as a strategic asset and then perhaps overlaying that with other critical infrastructure is grid asset information. Geospatial is obviously a key capability and other people have touched on that. Hydrology and water modelling is very important as well. We can't move water around South East Queensland as quickly as electricity can move around, for example. And finally, risk management. So in conclusion, the South East Queensland is a very good litmus test of what's actually happening with a large-scale smart infrastructure reform. The lot of the thinking now is thankfully catching up on what it actually means to do that in terms of information and data, so that we can actually start to get some of the benefits and the efficiencies from that, from a hard business case perspective and also out to the community. Thank you very much for the opportunity.